Welcome to another SAMSO Insights, where we speak with people from the industry, mainly in the ASX or air business. We're here at the UWA Club here in Crawley on the University of West Australia campus. And I've got Andrew Drummond here with me today, who is the author of two very interesting books that related to our mineral resource industry. It's called Rocks in Our Heads, and the second one's called More Rocks in Our Heads. I came across Andrew's book probably a couple of years ago, and after talking to Ross Luton, he suggested he's around and we should have a conversation. And here he is. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Noel.
Look, Andrew, as we know, SAMSO, we're trying to get that storytelling happening, and I couldn't resist getting you here because I've looked at your book. Immediately, I haven't read all of it, but it is basically a collection of stories in our industry over time. So, Andrew, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll move on.
Okay, thanks, Noel. Well, I graduated from Adelaide University early '73, so almost 50 years ago. I've been semi-retired for the last half dozen years, having initially begun in the exploration industry in Australia. Got involved in gold mining, feasibility. I was chief geologist in a West Australian gold mine. Then I went to New Zealand for a couple of years for a company, ACM, trying to acquire gold properties over there. Came back to Australia. ACM was taken over shortly afterwards, and I'll get back to that shortly. I then spent some time running exploration for Homestake in WA, and then I joined the late and great Ted Elliard of Hardman Resources oil fame to look after the mineral assets that they had, and we ventured them into a company called Zephyr Minerals, which is still there but it's now called Lepitico. And I've subsequently been involved in being the driver for the float of Westonia Gold Mines, and then Mine Makers Limited, and co-floated Bonaparte Diamond Mines, which was exploring both here and in Namibia. So yeah, it's been an interesting evolution of a career. I've worked in very many countries, evaluating deposits, trying to acquire them, sometimes succeeding, sometimes not. The background of the book was that I said I worked for ACM, and that was quite a large company. It was going very successfully in the early 90s in West Australia. It owned Mount Keith, Big Bell, Golden Crown, the Scuddles mine, or Golden Grove mine, gold mines in Queensland, gold mines in New Zealand, and was taken over by Western Mining and Normandy. And the 50-odd geologists, some stayed with those companies, but the rest ended up going to other jobs, and we were scattered around the world. And we had a bit of a get-together with the geologists in about 2014, 15, and over a few beers at the Windsor Hotel, we were just telling each other what we'd been doing. And I just casually remarked at the time that we'd seen collectively a lot of things and done a lot of things, and it could be a good book. And people said, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And then nothing ever came of it for several years. And then I was retired, and I contacted the guys, and some said yes, they'd write a story, and some said no, they didn't want to. And then they suggested some other people, and I'd worked with other people beyond ACM. So we got about 40 stories in for the first book, of which 32 made the cut to go into there. That first book, Rocks in Our Heads, is nearly sold out now. There's still a few copies left. But it spawned a lot of interest, and a lot of people then contact me to say, if you're going to do another book, I've got a story for you. Or Freddie Phillips worked in Azerbaijan or something, and he's got a great story for you. So I'd contact Freddie Phillips and we'd take it from there. So that then led into a second book, which was published earlier this year. August this year, so it's only 3 months ago. And that's selling nicely as well, and we're just getting the word out that it's basically a great read.
It's a fantastic book in the sense that it's written by geologists, or told by geologists who've been in that areas. And I think it's the great thing about that is with SAMSO, we're all about stories and understanding. I mean, it's not technically driven content, but it's more story driven content, which in some aspect is actually better than the technically, because you are being told what they could face and why a project can work, can't work, etc., etc., and the length people go to get things done, right? So, and the guy that you send over to Air Project, whether it's down the road in the goldfields in Kalgoorlie, or in Africa, or in South America, or Mongolia, he's the guy that's gonna make it work or not work, and that's how important he is, right? Um, can you share with us some of the stories that you can think of, the top of your head that fit what I've just described?
Yes, well, if I can just backtrack it just a little, it is deliberately a non-technical book. It's for a general readership that wants to really understand what and why geologists do, so that we just about removed all the geological words and so on. So it's more the adventures of going into a country, identifying an area to look at, dealing with things and so on. In a lot of cases, it's just sheer dogged hard work. The very first story in the first book, Rob Duncan, it's called a helicopter survey in Poli in the Cameroons. I mean, it was a heroic effort. It was a young Australian bloke went to a French-speaking country, and he only had a bit of high school French, out in the middle of nowhere, and there was a suite of uranium or potential uranium anomalies been picked up by an airborne survey. He had to ground locate them and decide whether they were worth follow-up and so on. And he started out with a motorbike, travelling around and having to service it all. He has to ford swollen rivers, push it to the other side when it's full of water, strip the carburetor at night and clean it all out and put it back together again and so on. And meanwhile the grass kept growing, and eventually got to the stage where he couldn't see where he was going because the grass was so high. So they then decided it had to be a helicopter survey. But there was no helicopter available in the Cameroons. They had to get one, I think it was from Nigeria, and it was half a dozen countries away, and there was no way he could get permissions to overfly these African countries in about it was the early 1970s. So this helicopter came sneaking its way along the coast, just refuelling as it went, and when he got near a border or no military base, he'd just swing out to sea beyond radar distance and so on. And he eventually got this helicopter into the country, and then he found there was no drum fuel available for it. So he had to source some stainless steel and have drums made, and they were fueled up, and the helicopter hadn't arrived, and he was coming back one day and he saw this red light a bit in the sky, and it was a big truck full of his drums of fuel that had rolled over. So they had to get that back onto its feet, the drums back on board. Fortunately, no one was killed, although they were riding on top. Some of the drums leaked, and the industrious driver topped them up with water, so he wouldn't be short of liquid. And of course, water in helicopter fuel is extremely dangerous, and so on. So anyway, they had to check all that, get it going. Eventually, the helicopter arrived, and the grass kept growing, and it'd get harder, and Rob would get dropped off, and in the grassy country, the helicopter would just hover and then flatten the grass, then turn and flatten it again. That would give it enough landing area. But first job for Rob was to get out and see whether the exhaust had set fire to the grass, and if he had, to stomp that out and so on. Then he'd go and the helicopter would fly off to where it could land somewhere nearby, and then come back in about an hour's time. And Rob used to have to climb to the top of an anthill and knock the top off and just wave his arms to direct the helicopter in. And the helicopter couldn't land, so Rob had to get hold of the skids, these sort of MASH type helicopters, and this thing would take off with Rob hanging on. He then had to get his leg over the skid and then clamber up into the cabin while this thing was flying on the next one. He did this time after time. There was no OH&S in Africa at that stage. And anyway, he survived, and he got the job done. Meanwhile, he had to fly back to London to get his backside stitched up because it got torn apart on the motorbike and all sorts of things like that. So it was just dogged stuff. And it turned out, in the end, all for nothing. The anomalies weren't reflective of uranium mineralisation, but it was just a 2-3 year effort all up, and it was just hard.
I think that's kind of description. I remember Asia talking about the guys that were chasing Olympic Dam. I mean, they were doing. I mean, it's the sheer determination of these guys to get the job done.
Yeah.
And also the passion to want to get it done,
Yeah.
and also the determination to get the job completed.
Yeah.
It's very hard for me to see today, like how some of these kind of determination could be repeated in today's world, because what you just described, most people say, well, it's too hard.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Yeah.
Like the Olympic dam story was they drove, supposed to go somewhere, car broke down. Instead of hanging around waiting for the car to be fixed, they said, let's do the survey,
Yeah.
that kind of thinking. I'm going, wow, who thinks like that?
Yeah.
This was then, but they got the job done, and in the example, they actually went on and discovered Olympic Dam. But this book is full of that kind of stories, right?
Yes, so it is. So look, as you know, often the first company or man to be on site gets the best ground, and so on. And there's a wonderful story in there by Tony Gates working in East Timor, when it was still part of Indonesia, but you could sort of see coming that it was going to be granted independence, although Indonesia didn't particularly like it. And he cultivated a friendship with the man who later became the president, but who was at that stage in a hotel in Darwin, and he he organised for Tony to get access once they got independence and how to explore. So very shortly after the UN took over management of the East Timor, which you may recall the Australians troops that had led the effort there, Tony had started an outfit called I think it was the East Timor Task Force. And Tony's he's got quite a military bearing. He's tall and upright and used to wear khaki shirts with epaulets and so on. So he flew into Dili very shortly after the Australian Army arrived, and he was a bit surprised. He was met by an Australian Army officer who checked whether it was Tony Gates and of the East Timor Task Force, and Tony said, yes, I am. So this officer took him around downtown Dili and showed him some of the problems, what had been destroyed, some of the logistics, infrastructure efforts going to be required and so on. This went for some hours, and finally the officer said to Tony, look, there's been some lost paperwork or something. I don't really know what the East Timor Task Force is supposed to be doing here. And Tony said, oh, it's simple, I'm just here to look for mineral deposits. Anyway, the officer said, mate, we're just about fighting a war here. He said, I should throw you in jail, but what I'll do is I'll take you back to the airport, you go home, and we won't tell anybody that I've wasted all my time with you. So Tony said, oh, that's fair enough. And he got dropped off at the airport, and undaunted, he waited till the next plane came in, and then he sort of mingled with the crowd coming out and got into downtown and booked himself a hotel and hired a car and went out and checked the prospects and so on, with the aim of being the first geologist and the first company in there. So that if there was something hanging out of the ground, mineralisation, they'd get it. Anyway, the work came to naught. He found some prospects and they ended up being given to another company anyway, which is just part of the frustration of the game. But yeah, so there's a lot of mineral discoveries and developments are personality driven. People just willing to do something different or try harder or be there first, whatever.
Yeah, I've met Tony a few years ago, and I can imagine how you would think this guy's somehow related to an armed force.
Yes, yeah.
Look, I mean, there's stories about people hanging out at the mines department every day to get the approval done, and the tenacious attitude of just turning out there and just sitting there and waiting, just who's gonna fall first.
Yeah.
That story ended up they getting the project. They found the gold and sold it for 80 million or something. But it's those kind of guys that make the difference, I believe. Moving away from the book in a sense, in your own work, how do you see us? I mean, I come from a time where lots of exploration drilling, and then came 99 where everything sort of stopped literally. How do you see what we see now today, and where we've had a good 2-year run, unbelievable run, so much money been thrown around, and to now where people are sort of hiding a bit. How do you see that transition happening? History repeats itself in some ways.
Yeah.
How would you narrate what's going to happen?
Well, I think the history of Australian mining and exploration has been boom and bust, and just about every geologist has been laid off once, twice, three times, or whatever. Excuse me. Each time we try, we sort of think that maybe it's going to be a bit different going forward. But certainly, if there is the continued drive to convert our driving habits from petrol-driven cars to electric vehicles, it's going to be a huge challenge for the exploration and mining industry worldwide to find enough, not only find, but get approved and developed enough mines to be able to supply the extent of commodities that are required for this conversion. Personally, I don't believe the industry can do it. When you sort of take out, right now, Ukrainian production obviously has all sorts of minerals has dropped right away. People can't buy Russian ones for pretty obvious reasons, but they are both major sources of metals and energy to the world. So it means the rest of the world has to work even harder to find these extra deposits. And I think it's going to be extremely difficult. And we're all aware of blood diamonds, which was a way of, well, it certainly helped keep a control on the market, but at a much more charitable and human level, it was to stop some horrible slave labour and child exploitation. But a lot of cobalt comes from exactly those countries, and for some reason there hasn't been a movement towards blood cobalt. But if there's blood cobalt, then we can that'll really stymie the development of Teslas the development, but the widespread adoption of Teslas and the like, because there just isn't going to be enough cobalt. Maybe we'll discover a different battery, and that might be the end result. It may not be quite as good as the current battery, but it'll have to do because we don't have enough cobalt. But in the introduction of the first book, I state that just a normal compound consumption in the world with increasing population and increasing demand, there's about a 3% compound demand increase for any mineral commodity on average. And if you run that number backwards for any particular commodity, once you've gone back about 25 years, it's sort of, if you're taking off 3% per year, it just about heads back to zero. But what you can say is that if a certain commodity, any commodity, if up till now, today, the world has produced 1 unit of it, at 3% compound interest, we have to find, approve and develop another unit's worth in the next 25 years. And then the following 25 years, we have to do 2 more units. So in 50 years, we've got to mine 3 times as much of any mineral that we've done since the dawn of history. And that's an immense challenge. And geologists are the pointy end. We're the ones who go out there first. I mean, sometimes it's geophysicists that have defined a target, of course, or a geochemist or whatever. But the boots on the ground are generally the geologists, and they make the initial decisions and do the initial hard work before the engineers and the air conditioning arrives and all that sort of thing. And yeah, I just think it's going to be a huge challenge.
Yeah, I think when we speak, obviously with Coffee Samso, we speak to a lot of companies, and I get a lot of feedback from people. There is a understanding that it's like that conversation, people. You really realise that chicken doesn't come plastic wrapped from a supermarket.
Yeah.
And I think that's if you relay that back to what people think, it's like, oh, they're expecting something to happen in 6 months. Anyone who starts from grassroots to if you go to production, we're talking minimum. The fastest I've seen was 3 years with Nova Bollinger, and Sandfire was pretty fast too. But that's 3 years still, and you got all the luck happening. You got a big deposit. You found it first go. Every hit in the development stage went as according to plan. And as we all know, this doesn't happen all the time. So you're looking at a minimum of 3 to 5 years if you're lucky.
Yeah.
Not 3 months, 6 months. Oh, they've announced it, they haven't found it, or they've this and that. But by the time you go, if everyone's doing that timeline, the demand is surging is that much.
Yeah.
You're quite right. There is going to be a massive problem
Yeah.
in that equation, right?
And governments, well, they're part of the problem, but if they can get their act together, they can be part of the solution. But if we want immense new flows of cobalt and nickel and so on, governments have got to get on board and just make it easier to get on the land, to get the approvals for the mining and the processing and all that sort of thing. But it's taking longer and longer. And in the second book, I relate my experiences in New Zealand, which weren't particularly happy. It was just an uphill slog. But there was an old, small, known deposit of gold mineralisation, not all that far from Waihi in a straight line. It's called Wharekura-Ponga, or WKP for short. Now that's part of the Oceania Group now, and they're now looking to build a tunnel from Waihi across and mine it from underground. But that's been in the pipeline, working its way through, progressing for 30 years since I signed it up. That's you can't feed the world the minerals it needs if you've got to wait 30 years to work its way through. So anyway, we'll see what happens. But in general, it's getting harder. There's more legislation. The land rights is getting tougher. If the voice comes in, that voice will result in it being even more tough in Australia. It'll be another layer of people to talk to, and so on. So anyway, we'll see what happens.
I guess in some ways, the upside of this that we, over time, I think you've seen it yourself. You would have seen it that things tend to appear daunting, and then it changes because our industry, as you say, it's up and downs are so often.
Yep.
How many times have I seen, and I've only been in 30 plus years, I've seen how many opportunities for us geos to become roof plumbers and teachers and taxi drivers, and then lo and behold, they're looking for us again.
Yes.
So it does change with the wind. But the upside, I guess, from my point of view, is that the ability to find those resources is getting more attractive. Like copper, for example.
Yep.
Copper price is down, supply is down, but we all know that if you do find a big, decent copper deposit, it's your holy grail, right?
Yep.
Because there's not too many of these kinds.
Yeah, that's right.
And same as lithium in some ways. Not all pegmatites have lithium.
Yep.
Not all LCT pegmatites have the deposit.
Yep.
If you find yourself a decent ore body, you're laughing.
Yeah.
Going back in your experience, where someone's gone and not expecting a lot but found something. I mean, is that something that you can remember off the top of your head?
Oh well, look, often we small deposits grow into large ones, and for instance, I mentioned that I was at Waihi. Our exploration was based there, wasn't on the actual mine itself, but that started out as about a 5 or 7 year open cut proposition. The mine opening was in 1989, and it's still going. It just got bigger and bigger, and they found some more sideways and all that sort of thing. So yes, you certainly get those sort of instances. Well, look at Telfer; it just keeps.
Oh yeah.
It's just out there, and they just keep mining.
I think that Patterson area is, I've had this conversation just recently, is that you look at what's there, they're all big deposits, isolated because it's so remote and things. Like you got your Nifty, Maroochydore, then you got the Woody, and you got Telfer, then now you got Havrion coming.
Yes, yeah.
But these are things that I can name, and I'm pretty damn sure I have not missed anyone.
Yeah.
There's one uranium play, I forget the name of that.
So do I.
Yeah, but it's sort of been sitting up there for a while because of the whole...
Kintyre.
Yeah, Kintyre.
Yeah.
That's right. And then there's the largest tungsten deposit, which nobody knows about, which is O'Callaghan, which sits 360 metres down, right next to Telfer.
Yeah.
They're big stuff, but it's not littered like Kalgoorlie or Menzies. So Do you think those places have more to give? You think there are more of those stuff out there?
Oh, look, certainly. I think, well, let's just look, the Darling Fault's just 10 kilometres behind us. We've got Green Bushes, so absolute world-class deposit.
Yeah.
Come up another 100 k's is Boddington, which is a world-class gold deposit. And now running north another 100 k's, we've got Gonneville, quite close, so within was it 20 kilometres of that scarp. So there's 3 world-class ore bodies over 300 kilometres in 3 different commodities, and that scarp the fault goes another 600 kilometres. Now there's cover and all sorts of things, but you'd sort of think, well, it's not a bad place to look.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thing, because I remember 2010 and stuff, I was talking to people, I said, look, why is it that Boddington's just sticking out there by itself and there's nothing around? And some people say, oh, because it's just a sliver of greenstone that's popped out underneath.
Yeah.
But now they're thinking, well, maybe the whole area's actually got greenstones. It's just been covered by farmers and no one's really looked at it. Now people are drawing a straight line coming down all the way down, and that's all prospective now, right?
Yeah.
And we've got companies all over the wheat belt looking for rare earths, and so the interest is there because we've got spurts of occurrence of gold or nickel in the wheat belt, but no one's really chased it up until now.
Yep.
So looking back, I mean, great that you got that ability to look back. Where could you say is sort of the people love to use the word new frontier? Where would be the place that you would say, hey, not much work there, but might be worth a punt?
Yeah. Well, look, I know of a very good rare earth geochemical anomaly in the Kimberley. If I were running a company, I'd somehow be trying to get on board. But it's in Aboriginal owned country. They've just said that they don't want exploration there, which is fair enough. That's their call.
Yeah.
But it should be a red hot project, and there should be some sort of a wise deal able to be made that looks after everybody's interests, and because the world needs a lot of rare earths that are coming from somewhere else beyond China. So there are those sort of opportunities that I know about. I'm sure others know about all sorts of other things as well. But then again, you just get the wild card like the platinum, palladium, nickel that's turned up at Gonneville from Chalice. A fabulous discovery. I honestly don't know. No, I've got no idea how they chose that area and so on.
But it wasn't their main target too, because not many people realise that.
Yeah, but totally full marks for them. And yes, and in our industry, we're often right for the wrong reasons, but we're out there drilling holes and testing models, and nobody really cares if you go looking for gold and you find platinum instead. Oh darn! So,
I think that's a good comment, because people forget. They always say, "Oh, what's your project?"
Yeah.
I said, "Well, I don't know, but I do know there's a big mineral system there. It's a big cooking system.
Yep.
That's the key, right? If something's cooking and we're getting mineralization, that's as good as anything.
Yep.
And if you drill the hole and you found uranium, or you drill the hole and you found copper or gold, why does that matter?
Yeah. Interestingly, you're right. But swinging back to the books, if I may, but in the second book, there are 32 stories, and there's a result, either positive or negative, for all but 2. But of those stories, only 9 ended up with a positive result for the geologist and the company that he was working for. Quite a few found deposits which were then just taken away by government decree or bribery and all sorts of things. So again, you've got to have more than just a good idea. You've got to be able to get it right or get lucky. I mean, we're talking electric cars, and Europe's leading the drive into that. You'd think they'd be busting themselves to find big lithium mines within Europe. And his CRA's found this huge one in
Serbia.
Serbia, thank you.
Yeah.
They spent $500 million on it. and they've lost the title to it. And you just think, now maybe it's just Serbian wanting the government wanting to look after some Serbian mates who'll end up going to production, and they'll say, "Beauty, we've got $500 million worth of data here." Now, I've got no idea, but you'd think that Europe through the EC would be just leaning on the Serbian government. You get this thing into production. We need it.
Yeah.
And that's in, if I call it a civilised part of the world. Don't mean to be insulting to anybody, but if we regard Europe as being generally civilised, whereas you can be in parts of Africa or South America, which is still a long, long way behind. Well, if Europe can't get its act together, no wonder discoveries are made in Africa and South America and some of the stand countries and so on, which then blow up in the faces of the companies that are making the discoveries and spending the money and so on.
Going back to the book, like from the first book to the second book, did you sort of try and get more? I mean, what you learned from the first book, did you try and get more different for the second book?
No. Look, the first book, if you like, just started out as a collection of geologist adventure stories. But as they came in, there was an underlying theme began to develop. Once you read all the stories together, and it went through in the second one, and there's that ore bodies, they're hard to find, they're hard to get developed, and they're very hard for the original discoverer to hang on to, and it's a very difficult industry in which we work, in which successes are relatively limited, but the world needs it. And mining has a dirty reputation, which is unfortunate. But despite the best efforts, particularly of the modern industry, anyway. But yeah, the theme that sort of developed is that it's difficult to explore. It's hazardous. In the second book, without trying to get it, that explorers die about a dozen different ways in the second book, from things like Africanized killer bees, from bacteria on bat droppings in old underground mines, falling out of helicopters, helicopter crashes, plane crashes, and so on. And we're out there in some tough country with some pretty unreliable infrastructure we have to rely on, and plane services we have to rely on, and all that sort of thing. Eaten by bears. Crocodile, eaten by crocodile, and so on. So it's not particularly sure. It's sort of nice when you get back to the pub at the end of the day and have a nice beer or something, but it can be pretty hard until you get there.
Oh, I remember I went for to look at a project in the Philippines and rode up there on motorbikes, street bikes, used as dirt bikes. You met a guy who's guarding the air project for the guys who are stealing the air material with an AK-47.
Yeah.
You drove past and he's trying to register what the guy just said.
Yeah.
You know, someone who's stealing your stuff is guarding your project, and then walking up there to have, that's the easy one. And then you're just, like you said, it's hot, it's uncomfortable, but I think in description to some of where my fairly colleagues have been, that's a 5-star trip.
Oh yes, yeah. It certainly can be.
Yeah. And then where's I've got friends who were doing honours at the time. They were crossing the Fly River in PNG, telling me how strong the current was, and they could have been washed down and things like that. And this is doing an honours thesis, But that's part and parcel of the search, right? Interesting to get your thoughts on this narrative out there that the commodities, when we're investors and they want to go and you've been in this corporate world, so you appreciate this. So when they say, oh look, I want to invest into a company and there's no flavour of the month, it's not lithium, like now it's lithium and rare earths. You say, oh, I've got this project, great, it's copper or nickel or something. You get silence in the room. In your history, how do you try and convince those guys that this is worth your time? Because the thematics of that has to happen. It's not like we'll never use copper again or nickel, right?
Yeah. just, I think at the end of the day, you've got to believe in yourself, and be prepared to almost put your money where your mouth is. And as an example, I acquired for ACM the old Edna May mine at Westonia, just this side of Southern Cross, and then I was the chief geologist on it, and they mined the oxide and didn't have much success going down into the hard sulphide rock below. And the mine was shut down by Normandy after the mine was taken over. By that stage, I was with Homestake, and I thoroughly recommended to Homestake, acquire this property. I know the gold keeps going at depth. I've drilled it, etc. Anyway, Homestake sort of said, no, we think it's too small for us and it's not the style we want. And I said, well, would you be upset if I were to put together a syndicate and acquire it? And they said, oh, well, we'd sort of prefer it if you didn't. And I went home and just talked to my wife and I said, look, I think, I believe it's there. I think this is a real opportunity. So we did put together a syndicate, but effectively it meant that I had to be prepared to walk away from this salaried job. As it turned out, I ended up resigning anyway and joining Ted Elliott and so on. But then we floated Westonia Mines eventually, did feasibility, but at that stage the gold price was awful, about $400 US and so on. The numbers didn't stack up, but it was brought into production later. It ended up becoming part of Evolution Mining. They eventually disposed of it, but it's still out there running strongly now. And so it's been in production now for 12, 14 years. So yeah, I was, it generated a job for me, it generated some income and some shares, but it was the sort of thing that I just said, it's there, and the management for it's not to say they're wrong, but it didn't fit the corporate model that they were chasing at that time. So
I think these big companies, they have a habit of saying that, right? It's too small for us.
Yeah, well, they've got the ability then, if they realise they're wrong, to buy their way back in later on and just take out the company and so on, and I think a lot of companies, large ones, are doing that now. The juniors are racing around doing all the hard work. I have no inside knowledge at all, but if you look at Chalice, they're sitting on a world-class platinum palladium discovery. We've got very little expertise in Australia of how to handle that sort of ore, etc. And it's going to take, I don't know, $1 billion or $500 million to get up and running. I suspect they'll be talking to some real majors around the world to be carried or joint venture or something, because otherwise they'll just blow out their shares capital enormously and so on. So we've got to be sort of realistic about those sort of things, and that's the opportunity for the big boys to come in and say, we're either in platinum and palladium or we want to be, and here's a real opportunity. And they'll pay big odds, but they'll know they've got a 50-year mine.
Oh, look, that's, who would have thought 70 kilometres away from where we're sitting now, there's this world-class deposit, right?
Yeah.
And in a place where, pretty damn sure, before that, everyone thought, that's a waste of time to be there.
Yeah.
State forest again, it had everything against it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's the tenacity and the luck in some ways, right?
Yeah.
Which plays a lot. But look, I love the gesture of the book, because it allows people to just get into the mindset of everything we've discussed. The guys are out there, the way we think, and the chances that we take, and the possibilities of the fruit. I think that's really where it comes down to. Would that be a fair comment of the characters? Like, I'm looking at the book, I'm thinking all those guys in there.
Yeah.
It's that carrot that everyone's chasing.
Yeah, and it could be for the guys, it could be for the companies, but at an individual level, they might have taken the job just purely because it's a job and I need the money, and I'm working for ABC Minerals on a salary or whatever. But other ones will be heading out as set up little companies, entrepreneurs. There's a very good story by Derek Fisher, how they went into Siberia in the 90s, ended up controlling a huge gold deposit, but everything crashed with the GFC. But but that was an entrepreneurial ship at its best. and yeah, so they went there obviously with the aim of creating a big company for which they'd have a big percentage and make a lot of money out of it. And good on them. They worked very hard, but circumstances beyond their control, it all fell apart. And that happens in many other examples in this book too.
I think, if you look at the story of Havieron, it's again a bit of that, what you just discovered. The guys believed that there is something there, they did the work, they went after it. But it was after a long, long time of trying to convince management and the money to back their thinking. You have the Sandfire story, then you get the Tropicana story, Nova Bollinger, all those kind of success stories are the tip of the iceberg of a lot of stories that didn't quite there, right?
Yeah.
But it drove the passion to get to that pinnacle.
Yeah.
Just like Julimar or all the discoveries that we see. Look, Andrew, any last words? I mean, I'll have these things on the website or the links, how they can get the book. Any last words?
Yes, thanks, Noel. Just reflecting, I don't think I mentioned that the stories are all set in, with a couple of exceptions, but third world or developing countries. So we quite deliberately don't have Australian exploration stories. It's too hard to assign successes and failures and reasons to Australian ones. So the theme is intrepid or stupid, Western trained, mainly Australian, but quite a few Englishmen, some Americans, but based here in Australia, going out to these very strange countries ending in Stan, or that used to be part of the USSR, or used to be an African colony, and are now devolved into a somewhat dodgy democracy and all that sort of thing. And so that's the angle of the story, because that's where the world's going to get most of its minerals from in the future.
Yeah. Look, I guess it's a fantastic way to compile information about industry that doesn't really come out in your day-to-day sort of media, because it is the mindset and the psyche of these kind of guys and the ability to go there and the how far you got to go to get it done, right?
Yes.
I think that's the essence of what this is all about, and that's what I loved about the stories, is that you get into people's psyche, understand, and then you understand, oh yeah, they're going to Tanzania, or they're going to Papua New Guinea or Siberia, as opposed to going to downtown Kalgoorlie.
Yeah.
But it's a very quote that the people, someone had mentioned to me, says, no, it doesn't matter where you go, you're always going to get the same problem. If it's not an AK-47, it'll be someone's brother-in-law. If it's not that, it's some native title issue, or you can't get enough funding, or something. But there'll always be something. Doesn't matter where you go.
Yeah.
Just doesn't mean that you go to Africa, you're going to have more problems than if you're downtown Mount Isa, for example, right? But Andrew, thank you for your time, and
Thank you.
I'd love to have you come back. And I mean, the wisdom that you have over the years will be great with people like Ross to share with us.
Thank you.
I think the whole concept of Samsung Insights, to get that ability for us to have a platform to get that out to guys who never would have come across your experience.
Okay. Well, thank you, Noel.
All right, thank you.